Okay, so this is Paul Bunyan, and in this story we're going to figure out who he is. So this is The Tale of Paul Bunyan. It's by Laurie Haskins Houran, and it was published by Golden Books. So long ago, the pine trees in Maine grew so tall, their tops jabbed holes in the sky. Paul Bunyan was born among those mighty pines. He was such a big boy, his parents had to use a wagon for a carriage, and when he cried, his tears made puddles the size of ponds. Paul's first sneeze blew a flock of ducks south, smack in the middle of summer. By the time he turned 18, Paul stood 13 axe handles high, and he was growing an inch a day. Soon he left home to join a logging crew. All winter, Paul and the other lumberjacks chopped down trees. Paul worked faster than the rest of the men put together. He could fell a dozen pine trees with a single blow. It wasn't long before he became the boss of the crew. Paul's first command was to the camp cook, "More pea soup," he thundered. Paul was always hungry, and pea soup was his favorite. The cook hitched up a camp wagon. He drove right across the frozen lake to the nearest town and loaded up with peas. But on his way back to camp, the wagon plunged through the ice. Paul scratched his enormous chin. "No problem," he said. He poured a barrel of salt into the lake and then a barrel of pepper. He told his men to make a ring of logs around the edge. Paul set the logs on fire. Soon the whole lake was boiling. The fine smell of pea soup filled the air. Winter was always cold in Maine. That year it got so cold it snowed blue for 10 days straight. Paul was deep in the woods when he heard a whimper. It was a baby ox shivering under a tree. The ox's white coat had turned bright blue from the snow. "Come here, little babe," said Paul. He scooped up the ox and carried him back to camp. Paul fed the ox a bowl of pea soup. Then he put the ox to bed in the stable. That night the ox began to grow and grow. The next morning the baby ox was gone, and so was the stable. Paul found the ox standing in the pea soup lake, licking the bottom dry. The stable was perched on his back like a turtle's shell. "Well, didn't you grow up fast?" said Paul. "But I'm still going to call you Babe." Babe went to work with Paul and his crew. The first thing he did was help Paul fix the logging road. It was awfully twisty. Paul tied one end of the road to Babe's horns. Then, with one good tug, Babe straightened that road right out. The days kept getting colder. Raccoons stole the coats off of sleeping bears. Fish grew fur over their gills, and one morning the lumberjacks' words froze solid in midair. "Hello, hello," they cried, but they couldn't hear a thing, not till spring when the words finally thawed. The river thawed too. Babe helped Paul's crew push the logs into the river. "Ride these logs down the river. Don't stop till you reach the nearest sawmill." Paul told 10 of his men, and then he and Babe headed west with the rest of the crew. Turns out the river didn't lead to a sawmill. It didn't lead to anything at all. It was a round river, and it flowed around and around in a big circle. Paul's men didn't know what to do, so they just kept right on riding the logs. 20 years later, Paul passed by the same spot. There were his men, with white long beards, still floating along the river. The water had worn the logs down to slender sticks. "Might as well put those sticks to good use," said Paul. He made the sticks into fishing poles, and his men caught the last of the furry fish from the round river. This is why you almost never see a fish with fur anymore. Paul and Babe crisscrossed the country, logging forests from Maine to California and back again. They made some important stops along the way. In Oregon, Paul put out a campfire by piling rocks on it. That's how Mount Hood came to be. Across Minnesota, Paul's and Babe's footsteps filled with rain. Those prints became Minnesota's famous 10,000 lakes. And on the way through Arizona, Paul dragged his axe along the ground and carved out the Grand Canyon. Lumberjacks came and went, but none left their mark like the great Paul Bunyan.